This episode is brought to you by our presenting sponsor, Pizant Building Products. Pizant Building Products has been providing contractors and builders with the supplies necessary to complete their jobs since 1964. They have built a reputation of honest, helpful, and quality service, serving the HRM for the last 58 years, now with 7 locations in Nova Scotia and 1 in New Brunswick. Our team at Atlantic Construction Podcast is extremely excited to announce our new co-branded partner, Procore. Procore is the global leader in construction management software. We'll be conducting several podcast episodes with Procore users and construction companies across the country in 2023, among many other things. Stay tuned. We're excited. Okay, welcome back to the Atlantic Construction Podcast. Today we have with us Alltech Environmental. Got 3 members of their team here today. Got Larry Koughan sitting aside from across from me from Prince Edward Island, senior environmental consultant. Dwayne Timmons, environmental engineer, Sydney, Nova Scotia, and Brian Fraser to my left from New Brunswick. Brian's been with the company for 29 years, Larry as well, and Dwayne for 11, 12.
I'm the newbie.
You're the newbie.
Yeah.
Still a newbie after 10 years.
Still the baby.
But neat scenario today, just with a representative from Prince Edward Island, Cape Breton, and from New Brunswick. So kind of get a little feel for the different provinces with an Atlantic-wide environmental company like Alltech. And yeah, excited to have you guys on. And I'm going to mention before we start that Larry Koughan, my mother's a Koughan. So sitting across the table from my mother's second cousin.
That's why when I got introduced properly. Koughan. Nobody ever gets that right.
Yeah, I was surprised.
Nobody gets that name right.
Yeah.
What's that again?
I can hear the comments coming in now. The East Coast Atlantic Construction Pub sitting across from a gentleman I never met, and he's my mother's second cousin. So there'll be a few comments.
Only in the Maritimes.
Yeah. A very East Coast situation.
Who's your father?
What's your father doing
Abstain.
anyway? So we'll keep it the family here today. No, but yeah, thanks for being with us, gentlemen, and yeah, just looking forward to discussing Alltech in general and all kinds of scenarios on the environmental front and just some different things about the different markets. But usually we get started by just a little bit of background, your journey in the industry and with the company. So maybe we'll start with you, Larry. Said you went to Holland College and
Yeah.
back in the day.
Back in the day, actually graduated from Holland College in the environmental technology program. And ironically, my first job with Alltech was at Holland College in Charlottetown. And Terry loves telling this story about him hiring me one day. And I had no idea what asbestos was. And I learned a little bit that day. And he drove away, gave me a pair of rubber boots and a respirator and told me what I'd have to do and
Thrown to the wolves.
Thrown right into it. But anyway, no, it was and that was, like I say, in 95. And just I started up PEI as kind of a branch office at the time and just kind of continued. I looked after New Brunswick then for a little while. And then Brian was in Halifax at that time. And then Brian took over New Brunswick later. So I was kind of quite happy that when that happened to give up that large territory. But no, it's been a great 28 years with the company and great place to be.
Nice. What about you, Dwayne?
Yeah, I guess I started my environmental journey at CBU, as we were chatting there earlier.
Yes.
Spent about 3-4 years there, of which included 2 years getting my environmental diploma on my way to my environmental engineering degree. Hung around CBU for an additional 2 years to pick up some math courses and eventually get my Bachelor of Science.
You don't want to dwell on those calculus courses.
Yeah, tortured myself for another couple of years for whatever reason, spent some more money. But anyway, eventually moved on to Dalhousie where I did finish off my engineering degree. Luckily, at the time, the Sydney tar ponds remediation project was just starting to go into full swing. So when I was coming out, there were actually some job opportunities.
This was upon your graduation.
Right around when I was graduating, I was able to reach out and stalk the former manager there to get me a job in Sydney. Anyway, persistence, exactly. And ended up working in Sydney at the tar ponds project once that.
Well, it's good timing.
Yeah, exactly. Because I know so many people that that graduated with me that had to go west, Ontario, to get jobs and that kind of stuff. So it was nice to move home.
Yeah, wow. And Brian, you're another veteran with the company. You said you went to university with the with President Terry
yeah,
Smith.
with Terry. Terry and I went took environmental engineering technology. At that time, it was the first of the 3-year co-op program. On graduation, actually, Terry and I kind of met up again in Halifax. We were working for Medenko, Montreal Engineering. So
Wow.
we worked there I was only there probably about a year. Terry was there a little longer, and then we parted ways again, and I went to work for another company and worked with those guys for probably about 2 years. And then
Right.
Terry always had this idea,
Yeah.
and I remember him talking to me about it a couple of times.
Mhm.
And first I thought, I don't know, I was skeptical about this, but we actually kept bumping into each other.
Right.
And then I
Almost
was
like it was meant to be almost.
yeah,
Yeah.
like I was in Newfoundland, and he called me up and told me, no, this is it. I'm going to start it. I'm going to leave these guys. And I said, okay, keep in touch. And I think it was in a couple of months he called me, started it. I need some work. So I sent him some work.
Right.
So I actually left that company after about 2 or 3 years, and I let him know, oh yeah, well, when you get home, I was in Newfoundland at the time,
Yeah.
let me know. So I was home for a couple of months in 95, I think January. Call me up, got a job for you to do.
Yeah.
Come on, here we go.
Yeah.
So
Here you are 30 years later.
yeah, still at it.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's a good story. I think, just that entrepreneurial spirit where you mentioned, like, he's thinking about it, couldn't get away from it, kept
Yep.
coming up, kept running into each other, and then finally he just had to. It's
Yeah.
almost like he had to do it. Like he had to get it out. And he
exactly.
probably, he didn't know everything at the time.
No.
Might not have had any work,
Yeah.
but he's the guy that somebody had to take the risk and get it going, right?
Well, we'd work for other companies, and we'd seen how it was being done, but it was always the way, we weren't quite happy with it.
Yeah.
Right? So
Yeah.
kind of we want to try to put a personal touch on it.
Yeah.
Our services and how we felt. And I know Terry really felt strongly about that. And we were always like a phone call away or down the road. We'd always take the phone call.
Yeah.
Try to help the client get out, situation.
Sure.
That's what it was always about.
Yeah, I was going to wait till the end to bring up Terry and the 30-year anniversary, but now they're on the topic. I mean, it's got to be pretty satisfying for him and for you two gentlemen, Larry and Brian, and yourself, Dwayne. 30 years is no small feat, and then to have that kind of retention with employees that have been involved in the ground floor and partners and friends, really.
Right.
It's, you can't fake that, and it's,
A lot of them don't last that long, right?
yeah,
No.
that's right. So it got to be. I know it's a big week for your team here in the city. Everyone's gathered. Probably don't see each other face to face across the Maritimes, all that often. Although you do travel and work together on stuff in different places. But what's that been like? Just to kind of reflect back on the 30 years and with the team.
Yeah, it's been personally, it's been a lot of fun. Like I say, Brian and I have been pretty well
Slugging at
life-
it.
and Rob Gardner as well, and Dave's been here just about as long too. And I remember going back to my interview with Terry, and at the time there were people that were more educated than me and had better qualifications, but there was just something, we had a connection, and I think I think that's what he's done. He's surrounded himself with just similar, like-minded people, and
Yeah.
I think that's the way we all operate. We just seem to work well together, and it's a good bunch of guys, and our staff, like I say, everyone has that same mentality of just people first and just connecting with people and making those connections.
Yeah, no, Ryan and I were at the office to meet Terry this month, and we got that feeling, and it doesn't happen by accident. Like, just a really good culture. Everybody seemed to, it was professional, but everybody seemed to be friends. You could just tell, like, everyone in the room wasn't just colleagues, but actual, friends, and it was just an atmosphere, like a really good culture. Yeah, it was a breath of fresh air when we were visiting the office earlier this month, so we noticed that.
Yeah.
I think one of the kind of objectives is to kind of give some context just to a company like Alltech, an environmental company in the construction industry, residential and commercial, industrial, and just to kind of talk about there's so many services that you guys provide, right? It's almost like one of those things. If you're in sales or business development, like you can't really, you don't want to spit it all out to a potential client. It's just too much to take in. But maybe we can kind of segment it a little bit and there's hazardous materials, there's air testing, there's your spec writing. What are some examples that you're bidding on some tenders sometimes? I mean, obviously a large portion of what you do is kind of retrofits and remediation, that kind of stuff. But as far as new builds in commercial, what's the avenue there typically for? Is it spec writing? Is it planning and project management of? Anyone speak to that a little bit?
I'd say it'd be a little more geared towards the testing or truthing. They're on-site engineer controls, I guess you could say. So like a lot of the new builds that are going up are requiring dust monitoring, noise monitoring, and we're able to provide
Leads.
those. Yes, exactly. We'll be able to provide those services to make sure they're operating within the guidelines and regulations.
And this is during construction or post-construction?
No, during
Okay.
construction.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah, like
Right.
so towards the end there, like new construction, like everybody's aware of leads testing
Yes.
the building. So
Right.
that's one of the services we provide before the building's occupied.
Okay.
We'll come in and do the testing for leads certification,
Right.
right, to make sure they meet all the criteria for the building materials they put in.
Right. So those would be numerous tests with
Yes,
numerous.
there's a whole thing right in the specification there that
Give
club-
some examples, maybe. Like some of it is air testing, some of it's materials,
Yes.
noise ratings.
Well, it's mostly airborne. Like, so you're looking for the building materials, make sure they're low VOCs,
Right.
right, and making sure that the ventilation system is actually doing what it's supposed to be doing. So airborne particulate.
Right.
If you're putting any kind of carpets down, that it's not releasing any chemicals. So
Any off gassing.
exactly, the off gassing, right? And there's certain ways of doing it. Like you could have a building complete it, turn the heat up for
Right.
30 days and bake it off, but nobody has time to do that. So
Right.
everybody goes to that. They're testing. So we're in for like, a lot of some of the jobs that we do this leads testing in, and it's like 2 days, and it's thousands of dollars worth of equipment and sampling just to get their accreditation for their points.
Just to be certified and have the equipment to do the testing.
To get that. It's a big undertaking. And we also provide other like new construction, like fire rating, like say spray fireproofing that goes into building,
Like intermittent spray and
stuff like that. So we test that. We'll go in and follow the specification, and
Okay.
we'll do density
of a
and-
new application.
Exactly.
Right.
exactly.
Okay. Yeah. Like you'll take the whatever that kind of measurement tool is and kind of measure the thickness and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, it could be just like a simple thickness test on a
Yes.
sprayed material, or if
Yeah.
it's intumescent paint, we can do the thickness on the paint.
Yeah.
We'll even collect the samples of the material that was sprayed on, send it into the lab,
Yeah.
and make sure it met what was in the spec for
Right.
density and
Yeah.
such.
Yeah,
So
and maybe just even add on top of that, where we do some testing services where you might be pile driving for the new foundation. Well, there's certain noise criteria that you're supposed to operate within. Bylaws, regulations prescribe that.
In the municipality that you're in.
Exactly.
Depending, yeah.
So we deploy the equipment and make sure they're operating within those guidelines.
and that could be dust.
Could be dust. Yep, applied to dust as well. Yeah.
Dust sampling.
And,
inside the
and
building.
another side of that too, on the medical side in hospitals and stuff like that too, we have to do infection control protocols for contractors going
Like negative air. setups
any kind of renovations they're doing in hospitals, because there's a lot more stricter guidelines when you're in those healthcare facilities. So we look after that, and as far as training some of the workers for getting ready to do any
Yes.
infection control work, and some of the specifications for it and all that when it comes into those jobs. for
So
sure.
healthcare is it healthcare one of those kind of arenas where you're taking up a lot of revenue kind of for a company like Alltech, or like is a lot of the jobs you do or maybe they're just, when you do get those projects, they're kind of more in depth and more complex and there's more services that you're providing on one.
Yeah, there can be, and it depends on the region we're in too. Like some, like I know in Charlottetown and in PEI, the QEH has done a number of renovations. They're going under another one here now as well.
They're just consistently
Yeah,
renovating
just
that place
keep building
for
it
the
out.
last 20
Not
years.
going up, but it's going out.
It's going out, yeah. No parking lot left.
No. So
Sorry, what were you saying?
no,
though?
and it's just like that. I think in PEI there seems to be more of it, and again, certain pockets of our work seem to go in different areas at certain times. But that's certainly been something.
The split in PEI between residential and commercial, is it kind of 50-50, or is it?
It's heavier, I think, on the industrial and commercial
Yeah.
side for sure. But yeah.
What about Cape Breton? How's the market there? Like, people know that Cape Breton is busy now with the NSCC campus, the healthcare projects, the hospital. Does that mean that necessarily that Alltech is, kind of, if contractors are busy there, then environmental companies such as this, the nature of this, would be busy as well?
It definitely adds to the workload, but kind of following up to what Larry was saying there about maybe the split. I'd say we do see a little bit more on the residential or one-off client kind of side of it.
Right.
Definitely have a certain proportion of commercial in there for sure. But I think it does go back to education. What does the public know? What do the contractors know? Are they aware of certain hazards that all play a role? And as I think more people are getting educated, we are starting to see a little bit more
Yes.
requests for assessing hazard materials, potential things that may impact your health.
Yeah, and I think that's the complexity of the task of, like, if there's a contractor that we're chatting with who's in a certain scope of work on the cladding side, well, everybody understands what that is. But then if you're a consultant, environmental company like Alltech, well, one thing you're doing is educating people that are going to be on the sites about, all these different materials and different procedures and things like that. And you have a team of people testing in the labs, and you have environmental professionals and project managers and your spec writing, and there's so many different angles and scenarios of ongoing workflow. That, it can be hard for people to kind of grasp what it exactly it is, and there's so many services too, right? As a consultant.
Yeah, again, it comes back to education.
It's all about education, right? Yeah.
Yep.
Where, like, you could be involved with an architecture firm like we were talking about earlier, and maybe doing some building code and spec writing on something, with the foundation build to avoid radon down the road, and kind of, catch it upstream, like Brian was saying earlier.
And just to even expand on the radon, it seems there's more education out west and on Ontario. But in recent years, Health Canada's been putting a push. You may hear advertisements on the radio or even on TV where it seems more homeowners are starting to come up to speed on the potential hazards. And, in turn, we're getting spin-offs of more requests to do the testing, help out with mitigation and that kind of thing.
I think Health Canada has stated that it's the second leading cause of lung cancer.
That's it. And a lot of people don't know that. But until you come up to speed on it.
Tell us what radon is for our listeners that wouldn't have any idea. They've heard it, but they don't really understand it comes from the soil. And
yeah, exactly. So, to spoil it down, a quick summary, it's a gas that's basically the daughter product of the breakdown of uranium that can enter your home, usually through the basement, through small voids, cracks, that kind of thing. And as it breaks down and enters your body, it does have the potential to impact it in the sense of being carcinogenic. So it's something that you should definitely look into and test for if you have the means.
And so a bigger problem in older builds, or it just depends on the quality and methods of construction it's coming from anywhere the building's in contact with the ground.
Yeah, so it depends on construction, how tight the building envelope is, as well as a little bit of the overall geography of the area. Mm-hmm. So if you're not in an area that's laden or prone to have uranium deposits, well, you're likely at a lower risk of having radon in your home. But vice versa too, you could be in an area that has high uranium or radon gas, but if you have poor quality foundation, a lot of cracks, voids in it, you could have problems there too.
When it comes to other hazardous materials, like asbestos obviously is a big one, and mercury, lead, all these things, like you guys been doing this so long. If it's a public tender and it's a big retrofit, say, are you guys kind of looking at that building and say, well, that was built before the 1980s when asbestos kind of tapered off as far as the government regulation, EPA and stuff, like, and say, that we're gonna have problems with this and this there. I can already tell, just from your intuition and those kind of things. Like, you kind of know what's coming down
pretty much
down the pipe. Yeah.
And we usually tell people if there's a building or home that was built between 1930 and 1985, mid 80s to late 80s, it's almost guaranteed there's going to be asbestos in it.
Yeah.
And some other hazards, lead will be there for sure. But yeah. Basically,
What are
age
some other
will tell
big
you a
ones?
lot.
Yeah, age will tell you a lot. What are some other big ones other than asbestos and lead? Like, is mercury pretty common?
Yeah, I mean, in something again in healthcare facilities for
Right.
certain things like that, you will find
Like equipment and
equipment.
stuff.
PCBs will be another one.
Is that, and what are PCBs? Like, mostly found in electrical components and stuff?
Yeah, I mean, it was used in transformers years ago. Some of them are dry transformers now, but some of them that had the fluids were filled with PCB oils. Lamp ballasts that are in old lights, it was in the lamp ballast as well. So we got to identify them mostly by serial number and by age, and to determine if they have PCBs as well.
And when you're talking about industrial hygiene, like with the, the people occupying these spaces, like, are these all carcinogens? Like, are these all things that are going to cause certain kinds of diseases, right? Like, that's what the danger is with all these different hazardous materials for the most part.
Well, yeah, like most, if you look at most control, we call them controlled substances.
Mm-hmm.
They all have like limits that you can be exposed to for like an 8-hour shift or
Right.
10-hour shift.
Okay, yes.
So
this isn't just occupying the building after. This is
No.
during construction a lot of the time.
Yeah, or like even the day-to-day operation of some
Yeah.
buildings and what people are doing
Yeah.
inside the buildings for processes.
Yeah.
So we get called in sometimes during a process where they're making or manufacturing, like welding.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're welding, there's gases and everything being used. Plus, what are you welding? If you're welding stainless,
Mm-hmm.
you can get hexavalent chrome being released into the air. So is your worker properly protected?
Right.
The guy doing the welding. So this is where we get called in to do an assessment.
Like an ambient air assessment? Is that what
Well,
that's
yeah, we
called?
do actually personal sampling on the workers.
Oh, really?
We'll hook sampling pumps on. We'll check for hazardous contaminants coming off the process.
Okay.
And it could be a variety of different things, not just hexavalent chrome. It could be the flux they're using, or it could be anything, or even well, nowadays most like hazardous products that we see that were used at one time, like very carcinogen chemicals, aren't being used. But
Yeah.
some of the replacement products do have some nasty little hidden
Sure.
things in there.
Yeah.
And they'll have an SDS or a material safety data sheet.
Yeah.
It'll tell you what's in there. And sometimes the air quality may not be that, pristine
Yeah.
in the location. It's not drawing everything out. So one way to confirm that is to do the sampling. And then, if we see elevated numbers, we would recommend the ventilation system, personal protective equipment
Yeah.
on the workers.
And I think with OH&S, like whether it's a contractor, a sub, or a GC, or an under whatever umbrella, like it's so tough to have to be wrapped around all the different aspects of health and safety. Like, you need a company like Alltech to even get into the depths of all these different layers of materials.
Yeah, well, and it's funny because some people, you get this a lot. It's like, can you come in and check the air quality of my
And
house?
who's asking?
it's like,
Okay, the homeowner's
anyway,
asking.
a
you there.
homeowner or a lot
But
of
who's asking at the welding shop? Is it the employer?
It's usually employer. Like
Yeah, the
usually
employer.
it's probably complaint driven. Someone's got
Sure,
some concerns, and like I just mentioned, the welding shop. But one of the other bigger ones around here, I guess, is silica. Right.
Silica, right?
Yeah, which is in concrete.
Like crystalline,
Yeah,
in brick and stone, and
or cutting it, or
Right.
drilling into it,
Right.
or finishing a building on the outside that has sandstone.
okay,
Releases airborne silica, which is a known carcinogen.
okay.
Yeah. So workers have to be protected. The building occupants have to be protected.
So is that only used in older methods of stone and concrete construction like that, or is it, or like you're not going to find that in clay brick, right?
Well, you'll find it in concrete. All your concrete
All
has
through the
silica in
concrete.
it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you're but
At the right level, or at a certain level.
No,
that's
it's at a
acceptable.
level. It's always at that level, but it's like more or less the control procedure now. That's why you see a lot of cutting being done, wet cuts,
Okay.
right? So you get a slurry. So it's
Wet saw.
Yeah, exactly. But if you do dry on it or grind it somehow, then
Right.
you're running into some issues.
Right.
So that's that's another. I know here in Nova Scotia they have a basically set of rules for silica, handling silica under
Right.
occupational health safety regulations,
Mhm.
and we're starting to see it throughout Atlantic Canada. It's another one of those things that's
Right.
being
It's on
pushed-
the agenda.
Yeah, it's being pushed forward, like the asbestos.
By what
like
governing body?
Labor.
Okay.
Yeah, within each province, they're
Right.
kind of pushing it as
Yeah.
okay, asbestos is bad, but this is also pretty bad too.
Right.
So we
Yeah.
have to.
You were saying, Larry? You mentioned something earlier there. You mentioned, I was asking you about the who's the homeowner who mentioned something about residential. I forget now where we were on there. Do you remember?
I think I was just going to say, if someone's saying, can you check my air quality? And,
Yes.
and I guess
Yeah.
it's so much more broad than that. Like when someone says, can you check my air quality? You think, come in and do something.
There's so
and
many
tell
aspects.
me what's in the air.
That's what the homeowner's thinking, right?
Yeah,
well,
right.
that's good. We'll
Yeah.
elaborate on that, because I know there's people listening and they're homeowners and they're probably thinking the same thing, but they're not, on the same page as your team, where there's, these ambient air tests or however many different ways you can contaminate the air. Like, just maybe elaborate on that a little bit.
Yeah, and maybe just kind of, I guess, on that point, as part of the education, just because you have that hazardous material in your home doesn't mean you may be exposed or could be.
If it hasn't been
right. It's more on the disturbance.
agitated or
Exactly,
disturbed,
right?
yes.
Like, for example, if you have asbestos containing floor tiles, well, they're fine in your home. There's no requirement to remove them or need to remove them if they're in good shape. It's not until you begin disturbing them, cutting, grinding, creating a dust, where it becomes the true hazard to the occupant. And likewise for mold and some of the PCBs, silica, like Brian was mentioning. So
right. So if the homeowner's requesting an air test, what kind of test is it that you're doing, and what accreditation, what gear do you need to do it? And could it be any number of a dozen different tests?
Yeah, it definitely could. And I guess that's why it almost becomes like an investigative thing. And we have what I like to call
CSI.
Investigative tools. Like we have, infrared cameras and stuff like that to check if for moisture. We have moisture meters. But then if you're, you certainly don't want to say, well, we'll check all the stuff. It's like, how deep are your pockets, right? I mean, we can test everything, but it's like, what kind of problems?
Homeowner's different than a government building.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And so it's like, what kind of problems or symptoms are you having? Are you seeing signs of anything? And so we kind of like to have a little bit of that process of investigative stuff first, and then streamline some kind of a sampling program for the occupants or the building owners or whatever. Yeah.
When it comes to, say, remediation or abatement on, commercial projects, a big thing. Anytime there's a retrofit, whether it's mold or asbestos. So if it's a hotel, say, or another institutional building, maybe on a university campus, or any sort of commercial building, and there's a big crew there, say from Envirobate now, is Inflector, or any other company that provides those services, is someone, a consultant like Alltech, always involved overseeing that as a third party for testing, and then on site as well for the methods of removal of an abatement and stuff like that? Like, is that are those some examples of projects that you would do?
yeah, I'd say so,
Atlantic?
guys. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It can vary too. Like I say, it depends on each province has different regulations. They're all very similar, but for example, we might just be called to do a clearance air sample, where some jobs we might be on for the client and doing inspections, doing visual inspections of the work area, checking their equipment, all that stuff. So there are minimum requirements, and then there's stuff that's actually like specified that we're doing as well.
Right. So, and that might vary too. If it's a government project, it might be pretty, buttoned up as far as in that sense. And then maybe if it's a private development, it's just whatever they decide.
And you get more high sensitive areas, like schools are very sensitive,
Yes.
and there's a lot more stringent stuff, and
And they're sensitive
healthcare
because the traffic is children, and there's like in that sense, yeah.
Your healthcare.
And liability
healthcare
too.
the same
Liability
way.
of the
Liability.
owners is a really big thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm just going to give an example just to see if we could pull some threads. Like, and I won't mention the name of the building. I was here, involved in a project years ago. It was a hotel, and before.
I know the one.
Gotcha.
Ah, yeah.
You're caught.
Got a lawsuit coming here.
Yeah.
And so there's a big retrofit, 7 stories, probably 150 units, and they opened up one hole in one unit on the first floor and one on the 7th floor, and said, "Oh, looks like everything's okay." Then 6 months later, you're spending an extra however many $1 million to rebuild every fire rated wall, and when it was just supposed to be a little washroom renovation in 120 units. So the owner ends up spending a lot more, 3 times as much, 4 times as much money. The contract takes another year. tell us, like, from your perspective, like, you're involved maybe in a project like that. You're going to recommend, like, let's open up a lot more spots here to figure out, what's really
Exactly.
going on. In that project, there was asbestos, there was mold. They were sending tests off to whether it was Stantec or WSP or you guys, I can't remember. And then you end up getting word every month that there's more and there's more and there's more, and the whole place is caked with it, and you're building a whole new building by the end of it.
Yeah.
So that's just an example for perspective. But like when you gentlemen hear that, you just want to pull your hair out.
Well,
what do you think to yourself? Like,
yeah, it starts with the building.
Larry's like,
Yeah, it starts with the building blocks, though. Like, if you're going to go in with a design like that, you need the groundwork. Like, you
Yeah.
need to have a proper assessment done.
right,
of
and
the building.
and obviously they didn't have it done. So
Exactly.
what would that look like then? What would the proper assessment?
Well,
You know.
you would go through the whole. First of all, you would find out from, if you're working with the architect, what's the end plan here? What's the goal?
Yeah.
Right. Like, we're replacing every window.
And they don't even know what's behind the behind the walls anymore.
Okay, we're replacing every window. Yes, every window's coming out, and then we're also doing bathroom renovations. Okay, well, we need to know what's on the windows, what's behind the windows, what's in the walls behind the bathroom. So if you're taking all those items out, we need to know what's there before you start, so that at least you get a good picture of the building. Now, that could be anywhere from, depending on the size of it. If it's that big, like you're saying, 7 stories, you could have hundreds of samples of materials.
Yeah.
Right. Same with like paints and everything.
Could be
And then you
lead
can,
paint,
yeah, and then you can sit down and say, okay, you found it in a certain percentage, right? And sometimes you'll get buildings that were built on different wings, different ages.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
you can go into this section or
Yeah.
section A, and everything's got asbestos in it. Everything, floors, walls, ceilings.
Yeah.
And then you walk down the hall, you go through a fire rate corridor. It's a different addition. It's only in the flooring. So then you could sit down and put a design together with the architect, knowing that you got proper specifications. And then when that goes out to tender, everybody's comparing apples with apples. It's not like, because if you don't provide that information, sometimes you'll see these really crazy numbers.
Of course.
Like,
yeah.
that's what I've been involved with for years. You'd see these numbers that just don't make sense, why someone took it that low, and then other people, well, they're maybe they're high, real high, but because they're very busy, and then you'll get other prices that are within the ballpark.
Right. And I'm just like, for context, like if a hotel owner's listening right now and he's got a situation like that and he has an architect involved, why not spend an extra, just for, whatever, 50 grand
Yeah.
to have an
Assessment.
environmental assessment done in conjunction with the architecture and design, as opposed to having a bunch of surprises for a whole year and, just all kinds of
Change orders.
added work. And so.
And especially when you have tight timelines too, right? When you have certain schedules set out in your head and you start running into uncovered asbestos that could have been caught and,
Sure.
being proactive, then that can really...
120 units that aren't rented.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and that timer, then the time schedule, you look at that schedule, it just gets bigger and bigger and bigger.
Absolutely.
Domino effect.
Yeah, and on this particular building, there was a lot of plaster, there was a lot of ceiling texture, and so certain materials are more vulnerable, right? Like as far as asbestos or mold, or so you're going to look at that too and say, like, we're going to have some problems here, whether or not it's all through or
Exactly.
50% or
Yeah.
And some of these assessments are semi-destructive in nature. Some of them, again, if you're getting into major renovations, there should be more destructive testing where you're actually physically getting behind walls and checking behind. And again, mold is the kind of thing where there are some limitations. Even if we're doing moisture readings on a wall, maybe there's no moisture there, but maybe there was previous water damage in that area and that's already caused the mold. So a moisture meter isn't going to tell you there's mold behind the wall. It's going to tell you it's a place where there could be potential, but there could be mold there that maybe happened previously. So you physically almost have to take pieces out of the wall to actually check in with boroscopes and get in to have a closer looks for sure.
And then are those data samples also, going to Alltech's labs locations and being tested for?
Some of them.
Yep.
Some of them. Yeah. How many lab locations? Is there one in each province as well as an office or headquarters? Like,
Well, we have a variety of different resources that we draw
Okay,
upon.
right.
For like asbestos testing, we do have some labs set up, and certain offices have it set up. But we look at, because it can be pretty complex what you're testing for sometimes. Like we just talked about the lead in the paint. We obviously don't do the lead in the paint analysis because it's we send it to a third party independent lab,
Yeah.
right, for liability there. And you can also look at different types of materials besides lead in the paint. So you can look at arsenic in the paint, mercury in the paint.
right.
So, we do use in-house testing, but because it's so broad, there's
Right.
all kinds of
Yeah.
different
Yeah.
little scary things that you can
Sure,
run into,
sure,
right? You're
yeah.
trying to cover all your bases to make sure that the client's going to get a very
Right.
in-depth report.
Right. But Alltech does have some scientists on staff that do the lab testing
Yes.
for
we do.
asbestos.
For
and
asbestos.
when we don't, I think a benefit we provide too, when you do get those lab results back from the laboratory, they're not easy to read a lot of times. So we can kind of translate it into everyday English for, the homeowner, someone maybe not familiar with the language or the environmental industry too. So.
Give them some suggestions on how to deal with it.
Any comments, Brian, on just the state of kind of the market in New Brunswick in general, how it's been for you the last year or a couple of years?
I find New Brunswick, it's a little different. Everything is kind of spread out. Like I find everything in Nova Scotia, there's a lot of congestion around the Halifax, right?
Yeah,
And-
peninsula.
Yeah, and I before I moved there in 2005.
Right.
I was based out of the old Bedford office,
Right.
right? So I worked here for quite a few years before I moved to New Brunswick. Yeah, it's like right now, Moncton is booming. Like there's a lot of work going on in Moncton, a lot
Yeah.
of commercial work.
Yeah.
So we're starting to pick up some extra work in that area there. And but the state of the business in New Brunswick, it's expanding. It's getting like
Yeah.
Fredericton's starting to pick up quite a bit also.
Right. St. John.
Yes, I'm in the St. John, based in the St. John office, and
Okay.
it's always been busy. It's more of an industrial center, so like we have Irving
Right.
right across the road from us, so
Yeah.
the refinery. So
Yeah.
we're there, and there's pulp and paper, and
Right. So you do have an ongoing relationship with Irving.
oh
so you're
yes,
getting
we
lots
do.
of
We
work
do.
from them.
We do work with
Yeah.
with just about everybody in the province, right?
Yeah.
We got some really good clients that we work with.
And Larry, I mean, I think it's pretty well known that PEI has been really, really busy the last few years, especially when it comes to commercial constructions. Does that kind of correlate to your experience with Alltech there in Charlottetown and throughout the province?
Yeah, for sure. Because again, I think we do a lot of work with government as well, but again, a lot of private stuff. We're also doing a lot of pharmaceutical places like that and healthcare as far as doing like HEPA filter testing and biological cabinet testing for certifications in those facilities. And there's large operations like BioVectra and stuff like that have large operations that require, and we have a tech there that is at some of these places on a weekly basis.
So is it facilities like that have these, complex operations? Are you kind of ongoing services with their building maintenance people, like just constantly making trips out for testing?
Pretty much, yeah. It's like an ongoing thing,
Yeah,
like a
of
weekly
course.
thing we're
Yeah.
going. And because they have stuff and we're there to respond like on a daily basis, right? So if they need something done, we can have our technician go over, fix something that's kind of not working, or their filters if they have to get it changed. Because some of the stuff, like it's highly clean environments that they have to make sure and maintain their certification on that. So we have to kind of help them, in keeping that certification and the maintenance.
That might be a good segue, just for context for our listeners too. For Alltech Environmental, in that case, you're working for a building owner, for the building maintenance professional, post construction while the building's operational. What about some other, most of the time your services are being provided to building owners, whether it's a government-owned building or private owned building or a residential home for a homeowner. What are some examples where you could be working with the general contractor under a GC, because you do have that avenue sometimes as well, right?
I'd say even that might even go more towards the environmental site assessments, or if they uncover contamination
Right.
on a property where they need, maybe there was a past oil spill that needs to be cleaned up, whether maybe you have that GC that's putting in a foundation, they're digging a hole, they come across
Yes.
something that's
Looks suspicious.
looks suspicious. Yeah, that's a good way to put it, Brian. And they're not familiar with the environmental industry, so they'll call in us to basically
So
guide
you've
them
got
through it.
relationships, some of these GCs and good relationship, they're going to give you a call and
Yep.
you know,
Yep.
we need you to come down
Yep.
and a bunch of work here to
Exactly.
clean up.
Or they'll run into a situation where they're doing a renovation, and all of a sudden they open up something and they find something they never knew was there.
Yeah.
It just doesn't look right.
Yeah.
They'll stop what they're doing, give us a call, and we'll go in and do some testing, right, for them. Give them, like, you know, an in-depth report, what's there, help them out. If they have to, you know, make recommendations if they need somebody, if they don't have somebody on their call list, who they're going to call
Right.
if we find something.
I feel like there must be like a lot of governing bodies that you're kind of subject to, and a lot of the work you're carrying out.
Yeah.
Is there one or two main ones, like, or
Let's say federal and provincial are two big ones.
Like as far as, and like as Brian said, labor and the Department of Environment. Those are a
Right,
couple
yeah.
of big ones.
Right.
And then it's other standards, right, from different organizations like ASHRAE or
CALA, or
yeah,
there's
yeah.
certain lab testing.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So lots of governance and
Definitely. Yeah.
Yeah.
lots of paper trail and
Oh yeah, and a lot of the testing that we do, we follow standards. Like we usually follow CSA has a lot of health and safety standards, but like for testing materials, we'll follow a lot of NIOSH standards that you can find from the Center of Disease Control.
Yeah.
Right? And any kind of chemical that you want to test for, they mostly would have a procedure how to do it,
Sure.
right? In conjunction with some of our labs and talking to, say, if it's occupational hygiene, we'll talk to Orvin, who is our certified industrial hygienist, to get confirmation of what we should really do, just to protect us
Yes.
and protect the building owner or maybe
Yeah.
the general contractor.
Yeah.
Right at the end of the day.
Yeah. And then speaking of paper trail, I think Larry, you mentioned earlier, after Fiona, things are pretty busy with a lot of post all the leaks and things like that, and the hurricane damage, and then you're going to have mold problems, and a company like Alltech would work kind of closely with other companies like First On Site or something, and you have insurance involved, and so no one's going to move on anything until you guys show up, do your testing,
Yes.
have everything documented.
Yeah,
that kind of
exactly.
thing.
Like
So,
there are liabilities for, like I say, these contractors that are going in there. If they start ripping something out and they don't know what it is, so they want to protect themselves and the homeowners or business owners, because they can open themselves up to liability of tearing out mold or tearing out asbestos products. That well, why didn't anybody tell us this, right? And now they've you have a homeowner who's up in arms. You have
Or a
building
business.
owners, and so yeah, it's all due diligence, and
Yeah.
and they know that, and they just won't touch it, which is the proper thing to do. You don't want to subject anyone to that.
right. Yeah, they know better at this point in the game.
Yeah,
so.
or they're supposed to. Yeah,
Well,
and so, there's still
sometimes
some
they
out there
probably
that don't.
Get
Yeah.
ripping and tearing and
Yeah.
pretty eager. We were saying earlier that just the nature of the services that you provide and some of the buildings that you've worked on in the past over the years, kind of some good material for some, whether you can mention them or not, but some good stories of, some past projects that you worked on, just kind of interesting stuff. And Larry, you were mentioning one on PEI, was it the Irving Whale, you said? Or?
Well, actually, it was here in Halifax.
Oh, okay, right. So you were here.
Yeah, I'm going to say it was quite 18 years ago, maybe somewhere in that area. So they raised the Irving Whale here in Halifax, pulled it up to the harbor, and so when they did, they had to, as wet as it was, they had to remove all the asbestos that was on board of it. So our company was involved in managing the recovery of that, not the recovery of the ship, but actually the hazardous materials and that part of it. So that
From
was,
the bowels of the ship, like from the interior of the ship?
like the shipbuilding industry was a huge asbestos
Right.
industry, and it was
Okay.
put in a lot of ships still to this day. But yeah, so that was kind of an interesting job.
Yeah.
Halifax International Airport, that was another one that went for years. Yeah, but
Is
yeah,
it different parts of the airport, like
the whole airport, they were.
because they've done quite a bit of work.
Yeah,
there
they
the
removed
last-
all spray fireproofing that was all asbestos containing throughout that airport.
And that's like an intermescent spray is
No,
in the airport?
sprayed
Oh,
fire-
right.
fire-
An actual fire-rated spray,
material,
yes.
spray
Right,
fireproofing,
okay, yeah.
Throughout the whole complex. It was all under.
It's more
federal.
like a paint, right?
No, it's
No?
actually like a fiber.
Okay.
It's sprayed on structural steel
Okay,
and
yes,
concrete.
right.
Q-deck.
And that's full of what's in...
It was asbestos product, yeah. And yeah, nasty stuff to work with and take out. But yeah, that was like 3 years, I think they were there.
3-year
doing that.
project.
Yeah.
It was one of the ones I kind of started with. And, yeah.
So who's bagging all that up? Like whoever the
contractor.
abatement remediation
And from what I remember in that project, I think there was 3 or 4 different contractors they went through to try to get
just
get
to get
it done.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so would you have 1 or 2, 3 guys kind of monitoring that from Alltech, or a project manager just kind of overseeing everything?
Exactly,
It's
on
pretty vast
a
project.
daily basis.
Yeah,
Yeah,
there every day.
Yeah.
For a year or more. Or
Yeah,
5.
because the airport was still operational. So
Yeah.
in doing that, you have to ensure that everyone in there is safe and that there's nothing getting outside of that work area that they're working.
So does that mean you're tarped off that section with negative air and all the whole works, right? Like
Exactly,
everything
yeah.
is,
Yeah.
Any other projects come to mind, Brian, over the years? I'm
Oh,
sure there's lots of stories.
I got-
Some of them you can't tell, of course.
Yeah, that's right. I'd be buried somewhere. So I got all kinds of them. I don't even know. I wouldn't know where to
Dwayne,
start.
anything come to mind over there?
Uh,
Well, you
tarpons.
mentioned the first job.
yeah, no,
the
that's
tarpons
what I was
after
going to
your-
touch on. That was a really interesting one.
So
where
that's what 12 years ago now.
Yeah, going back probably about 10 years ago when that finished up. So yeah, when I first came out of university, that's where I obviously started my career there. But yeah, it was such a large scale project. Like those don't come by every day, where we're tackling hazardous materials and I'll say tar and hydrocarbons, PCBs, that were deposited over 100 years from Sydney steel operations, right? So there was so much of it. It was really interesting to see the remediation tactics and the different engineering protocols and controls that they implemented throughout the project. Our role was to provide air monitoring services at the fence line as well as ambient stations scattered throughout Sydney. So we would provide information to the contractor who was working inside the fence line on whether or not the emissions were escaping what we call fugitive emissions from the site, so both dust as well as odors and volatile organic compounds. So we would help give them feedback if they were approaching certain action limits or regulatory limits. Then they may have to adjust the way they're handling the material or doing the cleanup. So it was really interesting.
Yeah, it sounds very interesting. Is there any kind of like frontier kind of things that you see now are going to change into the future, or more awareness, or kind of? I know there's so many services you mentioned. The silica, I think, in the concrete, where it's like, asbestos is a problem, but so is this. Is there anything kind of coming to the surface now that people are more aware of that they weren't before, or
I'd
that you
say
see?
Phased environmental site assessments have really kind of
1, 2, and 3. Is that?
Essentially, and I guess you guys can probably speak to that as well. That's picked up in the last, I'll say, 5-6 years. So maybe just for your listeners, the phased approach is phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, and a little bit of background on it. The phase 1 is essentially doing a bit of a historical review of the property, visiting the property, and seeing if there's potential for issues to exist on site. So potential oil spills, any form of contamination. If that is identified, you may proceed to the phase 2 portion, where we go on site and confirm if there are concentrations exceeding certain limits and guidelines. So, for example, I'll pick on hydrocarbons again. If there was an underground storage tank that we identified in the phase 1, we may go in the phase 2 and assess to see if there was any leakage that happened. And if there was, we could proceed to the phase 3, where we're essentially delineating the scope or the size of that leak, and then we provide that information back to the I'll say homeowner, property owner, or maybe in this case it could be a future property owner. So someone might be looking at purchasing the property, and you would definitely want to know or assess, what am I walking into? Because once you pull the trigger and buy that property, it becomes your problem.
So this is a proactive approach.
Yes,
that's going to require a lot more data and logging everything.
Exactly, and we're seeing banks and financial institutions starting to push that as well, because that's a big liability on their end if they ultimately inherit that mess.
Right. You buy the property for $1 million, but you got a $3 million claim.
Yeah, that's not a good business model.
Not a good business model.
No.
No.
Yeah,
The banks know that.
Yeah, it sounds awful. Has Alltech done some work at the wastewater treatment facilities here in HRM or another part, like another province and stuff? Like is water testing, or maybe not to that in that capacity, but water testing's a big.
Yeah, we do water testing. I know some of my colleagues in the Dartmouth branch have completed some water testing throughout HRM. Currently, we do some what we call chlorine residual testing on the current Marconi campus here in Sydney. So essentially, we're checking to make sure there's enough chlorine in the system to kill any bacteria that may cause problems for you.
Yeah.
Right.
Anything else you guys that we didn't get to, or that you wanted to mention on behalf of the company, or it's been a great conversation. I'm sure we could continue on. It's been at least an hour and a bit, so we'll wrap up. But yeah, I mean, this is a lot of technical information. There's so much. There's so many layers to these services, and very interesting for any business owner, any building owner that's tuning in.
Yeah, and I guess maybe one thing just to mention there too, we do provide training services. So if you're not familiar with a lot of these
all the training courses
issues, we provide in-house training. We can come to you and provide that, or
and that's on an ongoing basis, right? You're offering those
exactly.
courses
On the website you can check it out and see when we put them on.
Mostly employees of contracting companies that are working on job sites that are taking these courses.
Could be anyone, really.
It could be if you're a building owner. You say you got some facility people, right? We do provide training for that too.
Right, building maintenance professionals.
All the building maintenance professionals, right?
Yeah,
just make sure to keep them out of trouble.
Yeah, because Melanie's pretty engaged with the people over at BOMA, and
exactly,
very much. Yeah,
that's a big one for you guys.
And I was just going to follow up with what you said, Daniel, as far as the layers we have. To this day, I've been with the company for 29 years, and there's still family members that say, "What is it you do again?" Because
maybe this will help.
So
tell them to listen to the podcast.
Exactly.
It'll help.
It is very broad, but it's basically anything occupational health, safety, and environmental is
day-to-day.
a big umbrella.
Day to day it could change.
Yeah, no, and that's part of the goal of our show is to shed light on all the different aspects of commercial, institutional, construction, and this is just another example of what is it like, and kind of a glance or perspective into Alltech, and it's just a short quick glimpse of all the different things that you deal with on a daily basis, and it's endless, and we only cover just the verge of it. So very interesting. And maybe just to finish out, like I know Terry Smith, president, we were talking earlier in the week, and he thought it'd be a good idea. We have a lot of upper management on the show and CEOs and owners and stuff, and he kind of wanted to take a step back and kind of let you guys do the talking and kind of represent the company. And I just thought that was kind of a testament to his character. But I wanted to mention that about Terry.
Yeah.
I don't know him that well. Obviously, you guys do, but seems like a great business owner, and Alltech obviously has a great name in the city. So just thank you guys again for doing this. Real treat to sit and
thanks
chat
for having
with
us.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah,
it was a lot of fun.
Yeah, it was.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Cheers.
Cheers.
This episode is brought to you by Cook Insurance, your trusted insurance broker in Atlantic Canada for 50 years. Insurance is complex, and the Cook team focuses on delivering comprehensive solutions for your construction needs, including builder's risk, wrap-up liability, performance bonds, and project-specific construction. A Navicord partner since 2020, Cook is one of the largest construction brokers in Canada and offers national strength with a local touch. Whatever your insurance needs are, Cook has you covered. We would like to take this time to thank a longtime sponsor of our media platform, FCA Surety. The brokers at FCA Surety are experts in all surety bonding categories and provide unparalleled service during the bonding process.